Welcome to the second Advanced English podcast. Today, this episode of the podcast is going to be a bit shorter. Well, it's going to be a lot shorter than the episode yesterday. The episode yesterday was over more than 40 minutes long. It went for a long time. Today's episode will have to be short. It will have to be probably less than 20 minutes long. That's because today I'm in a bit of a rush. I'm in a rush. What does that mean? Well, I just had a shower. Well, let's first of all, today I've got work. I have to go to work. The work starts at 12 o'clock, so at midday. It starts in the middle of the day, 12 p.m. And that's when I've got to be at work. I've got to be at the place where I work at 12. But, of course, the place where I work is different from the place where I live. So, it takes me time to get to work. So, I've got to leave my apartment before then. I've got to be at work at 12, but I've got to leave my apartment at about 10 past 11. I need about 50 minutes to get to work. And it's nearly 11 already. So that's why I don't have much time to do this podcast. So I'm in a bit of a rush. The podcast is going to be rushed. I have to try and fit in the things I was thinking about talking about. So the things I wanted to talk about in this podcast, I'm going to have to try and fit them into a smaller space of time than I was planning for. I was thinking I would have half an hour or 40 minutes, a comfortable amount of time to talk, so I wouldn't feel rushed. But actually, I have less than 20 minutes. So I feel this podcast is going to be a bit rushed. I'm not going to be taking the time. I'm not going to be taking the time to think about what I'm talking about, to explore different ideas that come to my mind. I'm going to have to I'm going to have to stop myself from talking about too many different things. I'm going to have to limit what I'm talking about to only a few things. I'm going to have to keep it within a very short amount of time. So, as I said, the episode yesterday was longer than 40 minutes. It ended up being longer than 40 minutes long. Today's episode will end up being probably less than 20 minutes long. So today's episode will be less than half as long as yesterday's, because I'm in a bit of a rush. Actually, today I have in front of me, I'm looking at a clock, a digital clock. So a small little device, a small little electronic device that says the time. Because I need to know the time because I have to leave the apartment at a certain time. And before I can leave, I need maybe 10 minutes to get ready. So I've got to stop this podcast at a specific time, or I'll be late to work. And the only thing worse than having to rush this podcast will be having to rush to work. Do you ever have to do that? Where not just for work, for anything, for school, or for anything where there's a specific time where you need to be somewhere, and you don't allow yourself enough time to get there. So you're in one place, and at a specific time later in the day you need to be at another place, and it takes a certain amount of time to get from one place to the other. So you have to leave yourself, you have to allow yourself enough time to get there. And if you don't allow yourself enough time, you're in a rush. You have to rush. I don't want to have to rush to work. I'd rather rush the podcast. I'd prefer to rush the podcast a bit so that I make sure I have enough time to get ready, to leave the apartment on time, to make sure that I have enough time to get to work without rushing. Without rushing. I hate, and I think most people hate, having to rush. Having to rush to work is the worst thing. So I thought I would have a bit more time for this podcast, but I just had a shower. I just took a shower, and maybe you've seen one of my videos, although it was a complete beginner video, a video for people who are completely new to learning English. So you probably haven't seen it if you're listening to these advanced level podcasts. This video was about the fact that I don't like taking showers. And exactly for this reason, because I lose track of the time. Right now, with this digital clock in front of me, I'm keeping track of the time. I don't want to lose track of the time. I want to know what the time is so I can stop recording this podcast when I have to, so I don't have to rush to work. I want to keep track of the time. In the shower, I have difficulty keeping track of the time. And I don't like it. I don't like to take showers because I feel I waste a lot of time. I waste a lot of time in the shower. I take too much time to shower. I could do it a lot quicker, but I lose track of the time. Right now, because I have the clock in front of me, because I can see the time, because I'm keeping track of the time, I can make sure I can rush myself a little. You know? I'm keeping track of the time so I can rush myself making this podcast. Because if I couldn't see the time in front of me, maybe I would think it was earlier than it actually was. Maybe the time would be a lot later than I thought it was. So I would be speaking slower, I would be pausing a lot, and which I can't do today because I've got to go to work. So I'm keeping track of the time to make sure I don't spend too long recording this podcast, which is the opposite of what I was doing in the shower. I lost track of the time. When you lose something, you can lose something real, something physical. You can lose a pen, you can lose your keys, but you can also lose track of the time. And in the shower, I lose track of the time and end up, without wanting to, I end up spending too much time in the shower, which is exactly what happened today. Sadly, I would have preferred to have had a shorter shower. I would have preferred to have spent less time in the shower so that I had more time for this podcast, but it didn't end up happening. So because I had the shower, because I spent too much time in the shower, I have to rush this podcast. I'll just take a sip of water. Today, the microphone isn't clipped onto my t-shirt. It's not on my t-shirt. I'm holding the microphone. So let me know if the audio is better or worse than it was in yesterday's podcast episode. The microphone is further from my mouth. There's more distance between my mouth and the microphone. Maybe that's good. But it could also be a problem because I'm moving my head around and I move my arm around, and maybe I'm creating a bit of noise. I don't know. Tell me how the audio quality is. Tell me what you prefer. In yesterday's episode, I didn't have a clock in front of me, but I did have a timer. So I was also keeping track of the time yesterday, but in a different way. A timer, or I think it's called a stopwatch. Maybe. Basically, it's also a little device. Most people use their phones, their smartphones, for this nowadays. You have a little timer application on your phone, and when you start it, it starts from 0 and counts up. So you're not setting any amount of time that you want to be alerted for. For example, you could also use a countdown timer where you set an amount of time. For example, I could set if my goal was, if I didn't want to have to keep track of the time myself, if I didn't want to have to constantly, regularly look at the clock, I could set a countdown timer for example, 40 minutes, or today for 20 minutes. That would notify me that, for example, by beeping, once 40 minutes or 20 minutes had passed. The numbers go down from 40 to 0, from 20 to 0. They count down. It's a countdown timer. So you don't have to stop it yourself. It stops itself. It stops automatically when it reaches 0. It's a countdown timer. A stopwatch timer counts up from 0. And because there's no higher limit, there's no upper limit, it just keeps counting up and up the number, the time it's tracking, keeps going up and up. You have to stop it yourself. You have to press the stop button when you want to stop it. So it's a stopwatch. And I think they all have different uses. Yesterday, I don't have a specific time that I want these podcasts to run for. But I want to keep track of the time. So yesterday I used a stopwatch. I didn't want to set a time before recording. I didn't want to set a countdown that after 40 minutes it beeps and I stop the podcast. I just wanted to keep track of the amount of time that had passed. I just wanted to be able to see with a stopwatch how much time had passed, how much time I'd been recording for. I didn't want to see the actual time. I didn't want to see the time of the day, the time on the clock like I am now, because I didn't have anywhere to go. The time didn't matter for me. The time of day didn't matter for me. I just wanted to know how long I'd been recording for. But today I could have used a countdown timer because I knew I had about 20 minutes to record. So instead of looking at the clock, instead of having the clock in front of me like I have now, I could have looked at before recording, I could have looked at the time on the clock. I could have thought, okay, what time do I have to finish the recording? And with the difference in time, I could have set a countdown timer, which would have beeped. It would have alerted me when the time was up, when the time was over, and I had to stop. But the reason I wanted to use just a normal clock, where I could see the time in front of me, is because I want to rush myself. I want the time to be on my mind. With a countdown timer, you can not think of the time and trust that you'll hear the beep and know you have to stop. But that means while I'm recording, maybe I forget that I'm in a rush. But today I wanted to feel rushed because I want to rush this podcast. I don't want to spend 5 minutes of the 20 not saying anything because I'm thinking about what to say. I want to get as much out of these 20 minutes as possible. So that's why I'm looking at a clock in front of me. And the time is up. I need to stop now. So I'm sorry that this episode is a bit shorter than yesterday, or a lot shorter. It's less than half the length. But I think if you understand, if you have understood most of what I've been talking about, in these 20 minutes, then it's been worthwhile for you, because it means you've gotten a lot of comprehensible input in these 20 minutes. All right, I've got to go. And hopefully you'll hear me again soon in the next episode. All right, see ya.